Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Here are the stories we're following today.
John, the gain in futures and bond yields comes as we await this morning's jobs report. The median estimate of economists surveyed by Bloomberg is for a gain of 214,000 jobs in the month of March. Let's get a preview now from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
There will be three numbers to watch in today's employment report. First, the number of jobs created. Gains have averaged 237,000 a month for the past year, 244,000 a month for the past 3 months. Anything significantly below that may signal the labor market is finally weakening. Fed officials have forecast unemployment would rise over 4% for months now, but so far that's not happened, another sign of labor market strength. Finally, wage inflation itself matters. Fed officials would like to see wages increasing no more than 3.5% a month. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Mike. And as we await the jobs report, one Fed official says that interest rate cuts may not be needed this year, especially if the economy remains robust. Here's Minneapolis Fed Reserve President Neel Kashkari.
Wouldn't say they're off the table, but they're also not a likely scenario given what we know right now. If we continue to see strong job growth, if we continue to see strong consumer spending and strong GDP growth, then that raises a question in my mind, well, why would we cut rates?
Minneapolis Federal Reserve President Neel Kashkari does not vote on policy this year.
And neither does the chief U.S. economist at Morgan Stanley, John, but she expects multiple cuts this year. We caught up with Ellen Zentner at a conference in Italy this morning.
We expect 4 cuts. We actually expect them to speed up cuts in the fourth quarter of the year because we have inflation coming down faster at that point than the Fed. But I don't think that the timing of when central banks globally are cutting is really going to be an issue.
Morgan Stanley chief U.S. economist Ellen Zentner says she expects the first cut in June.
And heading to Asia, Janet Yellen has kicked off her latest visit to China, calling out the country's government for its, quote, unfair treatment of U.S. firms. However, delivering prepared remarks at an event in the southern city of Guangzhou, Yellen had this to say on the matter of protectionism.
The president and I really reject the idea that we should decouple our economy from China's. Rather, we're seeking a healthy economic relationship, but importantly on a level playing field that can benefit both sides.
Yellen's trip comes after President Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping held their first call in 5 months on Tuesday.
Well, meanwhile, John, Argentina's president Javier Milei has told Bloomberg he won't change existing trade and financial ties his country has with China. It is a marked change in tone for the libertarian leader, who has previously likened Beijing to an assassin. Bloomberg News editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite asked Milei if he still stood by those comments.
As for the Chinese government, what we've always said is that we are libertarians. And if people want to do business with China, they can carry on business as usual. What I said was that I wouldn't be aligning with communists.
And President Milei added he has no intention of touching the $18 billion currency swap between Argentina and China. China is the biggest source of foreign reserves for the beleaguered central bank in Buenos Aires.
And now to the latest from the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office is promising to prevent a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That's after a half-hour phone call with President Biden following the attack that killed 7 aid workers this week. The White House National Security spokesman John Kirby says U.S. support for Israel's war with Hamas will depend on Israel taking new steps to protect civilians.
If we don't see changes from their side, there'll have to be changes from our side, but I won't preview what that could look like.
White House spokesman John Kirby says the call between Biden and Netanyahu was direct and businesslike. Netanyahu's office says Israel will allow temporary aid deliveries through 2 checkpoints, and more Jordanian aid could flow through a third crossing.
Well, Middle East tensions, John, lifted oil above $91 a barrel earlier this morning. In fact, crude's risen for 4 straight days and is trading at its highest level since October. Checking Brent right now, it's a little change to the upside at $90.71 per barrel. West Texas Intermediate is down 0.1% at $86.47.
And in Europe, the oil giant Shell predicting weaker first quarter results. Let's go to London now and get the latest with Tiwa Adebayo. Good morning, Tiwa.
Good morning, John and Nathan. So yes, the London-based energy giant Shell did provide an update to the market this morning, and the big story was what's happened to their earnings from gas trading. So they did admit that those earnings for the first quarter have dropped, but Shell are also keen to point out that they are still high by historical standards. So the Shell division that does buy and sell natural gas has proved to be quite a major moneymaker since the Russian invasion of Ukraine increased volatility, and that profitability dropped in the first 3 months of the year, but that's after what Shell is describing as an exceptional fourth quarter of 2023. Shell will publish its full first quarter earnings on May the 2nd. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Tiwa. And checking shares of Shell, little change this morning. And time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. We're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, John. Donald Trump suffered 2 legal setbacks yesterday. Bloomberg's Amy Morris begins with a ruling from a Georgia judge on the former president's election interference case.
Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee denied Donald Trump's request to dismiss his case on the grounds that it violated his free speech rights. Judge McAfee says alleged comments by former President Trump are not protected by the First Amendment, saying that they were made, quote, in furtherance of criminal activity. And just a couple of hours later in Florida federal court, Judge Eileen Cannon rejected Donald Trump's bid to drop charges related to his alleged mishandling of classified documents after he left the White House. Both court cases will proceed on schedule. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
We've learned Wednesday's nor'easter turned deadly in New York. More than 700,000 homes and businesses lost power across nearly a dozen states. In the Bronx, crews were clearing hundreds of trees and limbs that came down around New York City. North of the city in Armonk, the wife of a Yankees executive was killed when her car was crushed by a falling tree. The Yankees released a statement sending their condolences to the family of 50-year-old Catherine Tusiani. Rescue teams are searching for a family of 5 feared trapped in a rock slide following Taiwan's biggest earthquake in 25 years. The quake Wednesday left at least now 12 dead. In the city of Hualien, crews were working to demolish a 5-story building that was left leaning at a severe angle. The quake damaged scores of buildings around the island and left more than 1,000 people injured. President Biden heads to Baltimore today to view the site of the March 26 bridge collapse that killed 6 construction workers and shut down the port of Baltimore. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says Biden will be briefed about efforts to remove the wreckage, reopen the channel, and Baltimore's recovery.
As the president said, within hours of the collapse, this administration will be with the people of Baltimore every step of the way.
White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre says the president also will meet with the families of the construction workers who were fixing potholes on the Francis Scott Key Bridge when the cargo vessel lost power and slammed into it. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, John.
Michael, thank you. As coming up on 5:10 on Wall Street, time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. And for that, we bring in John Stashower.
Thanks, John. The day began for the Knicks with an update on the Julius Randle shoulder injury. Not good news, but not unexpected the way things had been trending. Randle's season is over. Needs surgery. The injury took place back on January 27th, and the hope was that he would return, but his doctors have recently warned him of further damage if he did that. Knicks then hosted the Kings, trailed by 15 after the first quarter, dominated after that. They beat Sacramento 120-109 to end a 3-game losing streak. Jalen Brunson scored 35. On the ice, Islanders continue their push to make the playoffs. 4-2 win at Columbus. Bruins won 4-1 at Carolina. Capitals lost 4-1 to Pittsburgh. College basketball, Seton Hall won the NIT in dramatic fashion. Finished the game on a 9-0 run to top Indiana State 79-77. First time the Pirates have won the NIT since 1953. Now it's the NCAA Final Four with the women playing tonight in Cleveland. Unbeaten South Carolina takes on NC State, followed by Caitlin Clark in Iowa against perennial power UConn, one way or the other. Clark's brilliant career is about to end. She was asked what she should be remembered for.
Remember, how we made them feel, how we brought joy to their lives, how we gave their families something to scream about on the TV on the weekends. I hope those are the biggest things that people remember. I hope, all the young boys and girls remember the joy that we played with and how we took 10 seconds of our time to sign their autograph.
Men's Final Four beginning tomorrow night in Phoenix. In the Bronx today, the Yankee home opener. They come off a 6-1 season opening road trip. They'll start Marcus Stroman against the Blue Jays. Citi Field yesterday, the Mets finally got their first win. It came in the nightcap to the doubleheader with Detroit. They lost the opener 6-3, but then won 2-1 with 2 runs in the bottom of the ninth. This will be the A's last season in Oakland. They're moving to Las Vegas in 2028, and it was announced that the next 3 seasons they'll play in Sacramento. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. John, Nathan.
All right, thanks a lot, John. And ahead of the jobs report this morning, S&P futures, they are up 0.3%.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager, and as we await that March jobs report, we want to bring you an important conversation with Ellen Zentner, the chief U.S. economist at Morgan Stanley. She thinks the Federal Reserve is on track to cut interest rates starting in June. Speaking with Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden, Ellen Zentner says she believes the market's expectation of about 3 cuts this year is in line with the Fed's views.
So I think it's going to be more about inflation if the Fed were to cut as early as May. I think the bar is very high for them to go that soon, though. But I do still expect them to be ready by June. For the employment report, we're expecting another big number, around 245,000. Even if it comes in at 150,000, they'll say it's just one print. We're going to look at the unemployment rate. I think even if we get a very strong jobs number, we're going to keep the unemployment rate higher at 3.9%, and that's because so many people are coming into the labor market. And then you're still going to get wage pressures that are coming off. So when you talk about a Goldilocks scenario, right, that's going to be a report that says the economy is still strong, but it's not something that gives a definitive signal to the Fed that they need to cut very soon here.
Well, Chair Powell agrees with you that it's a bigger economy, not a tighter one, thanks to immigration. But you've put the neutral jobs rate of growth at 265,000 a month. Why is Powell's estimate of 100,000 wrong?
So, look, I had an estimate of 100,000 just 6 months ago. Essentially, we've gotten new data, and this is something that markets have to deal with, economists have to deal with. We have gotten significantly upward revisions to population growth in the U.S. And faster population growth means faster economy, it means faster growth in the labor market, and it also means that you're going to have a higher, what we call break-even level for employment, the amount of jobs you need to create in order to keep the unemployment rate steady. And so this is a supply-side story. That supply-side story is something that Chair Powell has been focused on since later last year. 2023 was all about improving supply chains, improving labor supply. 2024 extends that labor supply improvement where the growth in the population is just that strong. And so this is a real supply-side story that is supporting growth in the economy without creating inflationary pressures.
I want to come back to where rates will go in a moment, but just staying on immigration, Ellen, it's going to be a key issue, of course, in the US election. If you get Trump 2.0, what sort of economic impact are you expecting?
So I do think that this puts the administration in a sticky spot because, according to our surveys, households list immigration as the second most concern, just behind inflation. Yet from an economist's just objective lens on the economy, faster population growth drives faster growth in the economy. And so it is a positive for the U.S. economy. It's been a positive for U.S. job gains. It's been a positive for U.S. consumption. But immigration itself is a hot button political issue. And so I think focusing on just the economic benefits from it will be something that needs to be separated on the campaign trail.
But then what's the flip side of that? If you have less immigration, could inflation strike again?
Well, I think that there is a question mark out there as to how much do immigrants contribute to inflation in the economy. Now, the U.S. is very different than other economies where we have low-skilled labor coming in. They're helping fill jobs the positions that are open where we need labor, and they come in at low-wage paying service sector areas of the economy that help bring wage pressures down. So that tends to not be inflationary in the U.S. That is very unlike countries like our neighbor Canada, where they have very high-skilled immigration coming in. 30% of their labor market is unionized. Those are high-skilled labor, and there's a lot of household formation and a lot of inflationary pressures that come from that. So the U.S. is quite different there. Now, that said, it's more of an economic growth rather than inflation problem if you were to have a shift in policy, you have a big drop-off in immigration, and suddenly you have a very big slowdown in population growth. Then that is more of a growth narrative, dampening growth and dampening inflation. So immigration is neither here nor there. It's neither inflationary nor deflationary for the immigration that we have today. But if we were to suddenly turn that off, then you would have an impact to growth and a gravitational pull on inflation as well.
If we can come back to the monetary, you're in the beautiful Lake Como area in Italy. If the ECB cuts before the Fed, how much divergence would be a problem?
I don't think that's a problem at all. The Fed is on a track to cut rates, and not all on the FOMC agree that rates will be appropriate this year, but all but one believe that we will cut rates this year in the U.S. And so that market expectation of about 3 cuts this year, I think, is in line with the Fed's view. And I do think that that's in line with what the Fed thinks it will deliver. We expect 4 cuts. We actually expect them to speed up cuts in the fourth quarter of the year because we have inflation coming down faster at that point than the Fed. But I don't think that the timing of when central banks globally are cutting is really going to be an issue for the Fed. Markets already have cuts priced in as an expectation.
Well, the last thing any central banker in the world wants to do is to reverse course. Who do you think's most at risk of a U-turn?
Well, I think that the Fed has communicated that it will cut. It's likely to cut. Real rates are already quite restrictive, and you don't want them to get further restrictive if inflation continues to fall. So the risk there, of course, is inflation doesn't fall. If this immigration story provides so much strength in the economy and it starts to become inflationary, right, then it's not necessarily, it's reversing course in a sense from we were set to cut and then we're not going to cut. I think the bar is just too high to get to a point where they're going to be willing to start hiking again. But I think the strength of the U.S. economy really stands apart on the global stage at this point. So there is that risk that Kashkari pointed out that they don't cut at all. But I don't see anything in the forward-looking data that suggests they should not stay on this cutting track.
And that is Morgan Stanley chief U.S. economist Ellen Zentner speaking with Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden ahead of the release of the March non-farm payrolls report due out this morning at 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. Now we want to bring you more of Bloomberg's exclusive interview with the president of Argentina, Javier Milei. He has been speaking with our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, on a wide range of issues, in particular his country's relationship with China. President Milei had promised to curb ties with Beijing if elected, but Argentina does have deep financial links to Beijing, which include being the biggest source of foreign reserves for Argentina's beleaguered central bank. John Micklethwaite asked the Argentinian president if he stood by comments last year in which he called the Chinese government fascist.
Last year, you called the Chinese government an assassin. Now you're in government. Do you still see China that way?
As for the Chinese government, what we've always said is that we are libertarians. And if people want to do business with China, they can carry on business as usual. What I said was that I wouldn't be aligning with communists. And that's precisely one of the things. Who did I say I was going to align with? The United States and Israel. Do you have any doubt that that's my alignment, United States and Israel?
No, but in fact, you have a very good example at the moment, and I'll come back to Israel and the United States later. But now, as you know, in Argentina, the focus is on a Chinese space station in Patagonia that your predecessor allowed to get built. The US says that the space station has military purposes. Will you close it down?
Well, the point is this. Negotiations are beginning to audit and inspect that, because the Chinese say that is not the case. So we will move towards a situation, we will be looking at that, so that is not a problem either.
Is a factor in this the fact that you have that $18 billion currency swap line with China, which you do need? You need it for the reserves at the central bank. It's a big portion. Does that influence your thinking on China?
That situation has to do with an agreement that was entered into and which has to do with the trade exchanges between countries. I won't modify trade exchanges because I think they're trade exchanges between privates. Just as we have a part in our central bank, they have, of course, their central bank counterpart. I don't see a problem. And honestly, the trade relations haven't changed. Not a problem.
The problem would be if I was the Chinese government and you called me an assassin, I might be less keen to renew the currency line.
Have trade relations changed? They haven't. Not one bit. So that is actually counterfactual. There's no truth.
President of Argentina, Javier Milei, speaking through an interpreter with Bloomberg News editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite. You can get much more of their conversation. It's on today's Bloomberg Big Take. You can find that on the Bloomberg Terminal, on the Bloomberg Business app, and always on Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.